First thing you want to do in column 1 is we're focused on making sure that you've got the right butts in the right seats, as Jim Collins has talked about. The challenge is Jim didn't have a specific list of seats. And so, as best we can, we've put together a list of what we think are the fundamental functions that every business must focus on. And notice, we don't have any particular titles there. So I want you to set aside the idea of titles and just look at the functions. And so column 1, you want to walk through and put down who is the head of the company, for instance, who is driving overall sales and marketing, and then particularly sales versus marketing. Then you're going to be looking at operations, service delivery. I think every company needs an R&D function. And you can walk on down through that particular list. By the way, when we look at business units, even though you might not have formal business units, you probably have your company broken up by maybe customer groups or locations. And so you can consider those as forms of business units. Now, once you've put the names down in that particular column 1, what you want to do is look at 4 questions, and those are outlined at the bottom of the form. Question 1 is, do you have more than one name in a particular box? For instance, there might be multiple partners or family members, and there may be some confusion over particularly who has accountability as the head of the company, for instance. And so wherever you have 2 or more, know that that's going to be an issue in the organization. Number 2, did somebody's name show up more times than everybody else's? I recognize in growth companies that many of us have to wear multiple hats, but if you've got one executive whose name has showed up maybe 3 or 4 times versus everybody else 1 or 2, I can guarantee you that individual is either going to die young or one of the areas they have accountability for is going to get dropped. That ball's going to get dropped. Number 3, you want to see where you put no name in a particular box. And that often came about when you said, hey, who's accountable for marketing? And the response was, well, all of us. And we know that if it's all of us, then really it's nobody. Now, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to hire somebody. Let's take the customer satisfaction box. You may have 7 or 8 people that are overseeing various groups of customers. And so I'm not meaning that you necessarily need to hire somebody over them, but what it does mean is whomever those 7 report to, that person is either the default person accountable for making sure the customers are happy, or pick one of the 7. And you can rotate maybe every 6 months the accountability, but make sure that one particular individual has accountability for making sure that all the information is gathered up on whether the customers are happy, that it's put into some kind of a form that can be shared at a weekly meeting, and somebody's at least making sure that some conversation is happening around those company, whether customers are happy or not in the organization. And so that's what we mean by there may be an empty box and you're going to have to find a way to fill it. Also, by the way, outsourced functions are fine. We outsource our HR function to a company called TriNet. And so that's okay on this particular form. And then the last question is, are you enthusiastic about the person you have in that box? Look, you might have only a single person, it's the only box they have, but they're not really getting their job done. And so that's what I want to come to next. What do we mean by the job they need to accomplish? That's what columns 2 and 3 are for this form. Column 2 is where you want to put down 1 or 2, maybe 3 key performance indicators, KPIs, what we call leading indicators that they are accountable for. In fact, it goes back a little bit to Jim Collins' new book, How the Mighty Fall, where he said one of the things he's noticed when he works with executive teams is he'll just ask them, introduce yourself. And he finds executives with good companies will tend to give a title, where executives at strong and great companies will have a tendency to share what their responsibilities are in a very measurable fashion, like, I am responsible for driving revenue into this company. And so that's the ideas of columns 2 and 3. Both the KPIs that they're responsible for and the particular outcome. So let's take, for instance, the head of the company. I think a great question to ask is, what is the most important KPI for the person running the organization? And the tendency is to say things like, well, generate profit or generate revenue. And I might agree, but those are the outcomes. Those are the things that you're going to put in column 3 off of your P&L, your balance sheet, and your cash flow statement. What we're looking for are the activities, the results that each function must deliver on if you're going to get those outcomes. And for me, the most important KPI for the head of the company is very simple. How many KPIs underneath him or her were hit by the other executives? It can be a simple ratio of 8 out of 10 or 6 out of 12. Because the fundamental job of the head of the company is to make sure you have the right people doing the right things and getting the right results. And so again, your job is to make sure you have the right people in each one of those boxes, that you have them focused on the right activities measured by their KPIs, and that ultimately you are getting the results that the company needs to achieve. By the way, we found an interesting website called kpilibrary.com that you can go to as a source for various KPIs in both industries as well as functions. One morning before we leave column 1 of the People tool, if you remember back the beginning days of the company, you would put your name probably in every box. It was me, 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 me. And all growing a business is trying to figure out which box you want to give away next, hopefully to somebody who can do it much better than you, who can wow you in a good way. The warning is that you probably should not give away a box more than every 6 to 9 months, because it's going to take that amount of time for you to find the right person, get them in that position, and get your DNA transferred down to them, and to a point where they're able to kind of pay for their own salary. Then you can afford to bring in a second and a third person, unless the company's growing at 100% a year, you're VC backed, and then I've seen many cases where you might have to bring in 3 or 4 people at the same time.